I said before the break we'd be joined by one of the skeptics. Well, the man in question is a very eminent sports writer. He was Irish Sports Writer of the Year on a number of occasions. Living in Britain, he was nominated as British Sports Writer of the Year, which award he won. And he collaborated on 2 books with Stephen Roche. I'm not sure whether they would describe themselves as friends. He writes for the Sunday Times. Will you welcome, please, David Walsh? David? Thank you very much. David, are you still friends? I mean, do you see yourself as a friend of Stephen Roche, or are you bitterly disappointed in what you think you've discovered from these files?
No, I wouldn't describe myself as bitterly disappointed, and I would describe myself as a friend of Stephen's. I've known Stephen for almost 20 years, and in that time we've never had a cross word. We collaborated on 2 books. He was good to work with. He was a generous guy always. Over the years, I would have had major reservations about Stephen's response to what I would have regarded as the doping phenomenon in cycling, which was poisoning the sport and destroying it. And I believe cycling now is a sick sport that has a long way to go before it recovers.
Can you just put in for 1 second, Pat?
Yeah.
Because as you go on, I might forget, you know. But I think what you might be getting at the fact that maybe that I was a little bit naive, which I've said to yourself on a number of cases, as to what might have been going on in the peloton, which I think you have difficulty in actually coming to terms with.
Yeah, I just found it really difficult to comprehend that.
Sorry, Dave. Okay, go ahead.
I found it really difficult to comprehend that somebody like Paul Kimmage could go into the peloton. He could spend 4 years as a bike racer, and he could see that this sport had a major drug problem. He writes a book. He doesn't name anybody. He doesn't blame anybody. He says, this is an appalling situation that a young guy comes into this peloton, and within a year, he comes to a crossroads. There's one signpost which says, this way drugs, this way success. This way clean, and you don't have a chance. Kimmage wrote about that. And his biggest critic was Stephen Roche, who'd been in the peloton 8 years at that time. And I just found it amazing that a guy who was there such a short time should know so much more than a guy who was there twice that amount of time.
Well, David, I do accept what you're saying, you know, but I've never told you a lie as regards the, when we had interviews, I was always straight up at the interview, and I was very straight. And I think that in French television, and French journalists, in Belgium, Italian, they all like to have me on their shows because they know they get what they see. And I've always been the same with journalists, and that's why I've gotten so far. But you spent many years in France yourself.
Just 1 year.
1 year in France.
Yeah.
How many years were you writing on cycling?
I've been writing on cycling 20 years now.
You've only discovered this doping thing now?
No.
You must have been naive yourself then, David.
No, I know. And
David,
yeah.
I think it's an interesting point that, you know, Paul Kimmage lifted the lid,
yeah.
and you know, go along with that thesis. But, I mean, how many correspondents on the sport actually suspected something and didn't lift the lid?
Yeah, what you've got to understand, Pat, is that, well, I mean, I started covering this sport in 1981. Stephen Roche and Sean Kelly were heroes of mine. I went to France to live there, to write about these guys, because I thought what they did was so magnificent. And I really enjoyed covering them. I didn't know cycling had such a drug culture at that time. Of course, there were little things that happened that made you think. You know, just little things you would hear. I remember one day actually being at the start of a race and seeing a bike rider get out from his car and walk over to his bike. And I actually heard the rattle of pills in a little canister in his back pocket. And things like that would make you think. But it wasn't evidence. And the big thing at that time was that everybody was passing the controls. There were dope controls, and everybody was passing them. And we're just finish the point. We didn't understand at that time. Naivety, lack of information, whatever. We didn't understand that loads of drugs were undetectable.
But isn't it possible in every sport that you have people who are naturally gifted and who never have to look at drugs to help them achieve something? And there are others who see the Holy Grail, whether it's money, success, or whatever. They know they can't make it on their natural ability, and they resort to artificial help. It doesn't mean everybody's doing it.
Pat, that has been the traditional response. If a guy complained, when Paul Kimmage produced his book, They said, typical of what a loser does. Couldn't make it, so he blames everybody else. When Willy Vogt was found, the guy who came from Belgium, caught on the French border with all the drugs in his car, he eventually wrote a book, and he printed pages from his diary. And Willie was the accountant in the team as well as the masseur. He gave the guys the drugs, he wrote down how much they got, and then he went to them and said, you owe us this amount for all the drugs you've taken. There was, I think, 23 guys in the team. 19 of them were in Willie's diary. He's taken a huge amount of drugs. And the thing that we realized when we saw his diary was that the biggest riders in the team, the guys who had achieved the most success, were the guys taking the most drugs.
But can I just offer you a parallel? I mean, Ben Johnson was caught taking drugs. He was the fastest man in the world. There are people in the world achieving those times today.
Yes.
And they do it without drugs.
Who says that they're without drugs?
Well, I mean, I have to give them the benefit of the doubt. If they haven't been caught in the testing as it exists at the moment, I have to assume. I mean, forgive me, but I mean, I can't read a newspaper anymore if I believe otherwise.
Yeah, Maurice Greene is coached by a guy called John Smith. John Smith has always been a character about whom the athletics world is suspicious. Growth hormone is a hugely popular drug now. When the Tour de France scandal happened in 1998, we saw that growth hormone was the drug the cyclists were using.
Okay.
It's undetectable.
Stephen.
David, one as well, like, for example, you said earlier on you never had a quarrel. That's one thing I would totally agree with. We've never had a word on the side. We've always been straight up. You've always had a good relationship. You wrote 2 books for me together. You stayed a week or so in my house. You won an award for an article you wrote with me back in '87. Probably naively wrote it now, I'd probably say, because it was a good article, a very good article. You wrote about myself and Kelly for a number of years, and it helped forge your name in journalism because of your excellent writing, I must say, as well. I do agree with excellent writing. But one thing I do not understand, and I cannot come to terms with, is the fact that you wrote this article, damaging and reckless as I can see it, on such little evidence that you say is evidence, but you can't even prove it to me or anybody that it's evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I disagree emphatically. I think what has happened in the Concone files is really damaging for Stephen. When a friend of mine rang me and he said, I've just been listening to Eurosport, and Stephen is in the Concone files, and my heart dropped. I was disappointed. Now, I can't say I was madly surprised, because I do believe that doping is pervasive in the sport, but I was disappointed. Looked into it. I went to Italy. I spent a week there. I looked through all these files. Basically, what you've got is Stephen Roche is in the Concone files. He's got 6 bogus names, like there's 6 career riders in the team. They were all given bogus names, as well as their real name appearing. 6 bogus names. It says in the files that Stephen was treated with EPO. Now, when the Stasi papers appeared in 1991, we used the evidence of the Stasi papers, documentary evidence like this, to say the East Germans were all guilty, which they were. Now we've got very similar type information in the Western world, and we have to look at it seriously.
Okay, but the headline...
Is the information that you put in the
we'll talk about the specifics in a moment.
Is that kind of information you have to say that I took EPO or was been treated with EPO?
Well, there's a very bottom line question here.
No, I'm asking you a question.
Just let me put it this way. As a journalist, I look at this and I say, why would Professor Concone go to such lengths to make it look like Stephen Roche and 22 other elite sportsmen have used drugs? Why would he do it? What motivation could he have?
Okay, we'll talk about that in a moment, but just first of all, the headline, Roche dope papers revealed. Now, without even reading the fine print of stories, and many people don't, they go into the garage to buy the bread and the milk and a paper, and they see your paper. They may buy it, they may not, and they see across the top of the paper, Roche dope papers revealed. I mean, that's a very unfair, that's sort of convicting someone with a headline, isn't it? And it's very hard to fight that kind of thing.
Well, I don't know if it's convicting. I mean, my argument all the time in the Sunday Times was that Stephen had serious questions to answer. Yeah. Stephen has answered them in a newspaper article last Sunday. Stephen said, what has happened here is that I did the blood test. The blood was taken from me, and when it went to the laboratory, EPO was added to it.
No, I didn't say that.
Well,
I do agree, David, that was marked in the paper, but I never said that. I said the blood was used for experiments, I believe. But I never said EPO was added to it. That was a misprint, but the journalists misprinted it in some way, like many journalists have done over the last couple of days. They've misprinted
can we just clarify, because we have, Stephen has a graphic there, and there is a graphic that appeared in your newspaper. The numbers we should be looking out for, the numbers whether it's 1.8 or 5.5. David, what is that number?
It's a number that it's basically a concentration level of transferrin receptors. It's something that appears in the blood.
The higher it is, the more likely someone is to have taken EPO, is that right?
Concone's thesis was that anybody that went over 3.1 was basically, this indicated EPO, that he'd been treated with EPO.
Well, in that situation, David, you have here in the list.
Okay, if you give it to me, Stephen, I'll offer it to a camera.
For example, you have, I have it all in calendar order, because David, when he printed it in the paper, was in probably the order he got it in. But for example, you see there that the orange on top, there's Roche, and Rossioli, as we call it. 9th of July 1992, it goes across and has S 3.25, it has S at 2.85, and it has N 1.81. That means you had 3 blood tests the same day. You have two blood tests say there's yes, S meaning yes, I took something, and one is N saying I didn't take anything. If you go down along, then you have the pink one, you have 30th November 92, you have 1.6, 30th November again, 1.11, you have N after it. So what David's trying to say is that, well, those values are very low, so obviously they didn't take anything. Go down again, you have the green, 3rd of February 93, S meaning yes, 4.29, 3rd of February again, 93, N meaning 2.34. Which one is mine, the 4.29 or 2.34? And then again, February, must remember, was a training period. So why would I be taking something for performance enhancing if I'm only training? And how could the level go down so quickly in the same day? As you go down further on, the last bottom line, you have July 16th, 93, S 2.56, July 16th, 93, S again, 3.770. There's an awful lot of stuff in there that I can't even answer, but for people to believe, or for people to be led to believe by a newspaper that these analyses were done here frequently to disguise the fact that I was actually doing more blood tests than the normal to check up on my EPO level.
One of the things you said to me, Stephen, and you might like to repeat it on air here, you say that when your levels were very low, you were winning.
Well, for example, here you have 1992. If you look at the top of it again, you have, in the first part of it, there's one that's over the 3. There's one marked S that's got 3.25. I had a fabulous tour in 1992. I won a stage in the Bull. I think I finished 9th overall. I finished 4th in the stage, 2nd in the stage. But if David's theory is right, if you look down the bottom of it, like at a normal season in 1993, and once again, we look at the values again of June, the 3rd line from the bottom, okay, June 14th,
down here.
It says 550, and it goes July 93, 256. I would have much prepared to have a 550 for the July Tour de France than being in June for training. So where's the logic in the chart? What David is saying, I understand what he's saying, but a 3.1, which Concone is supposed to have said, was level.
But do you understand how David would say Stephen has questions to answer? I mean, can you answer?
I understand David as being, the journalist he is, and the integrity that he has, and the esteem that I have for David. I understand David asking the question. But what I do not understand is how David can run with such a reckless bit of paper and say that, how come we done 3 blood tests?
Is your contention that he should have got more evidence?
I think that if David had gone down to this and asked for scientific information on it, he would have gotten the answers that I've given.
David?
The evidence is actually there. Professor Concone is saying that he treated Stephen Roche.
No, he didn't say that.
There's a column. There's a column marked yes or no, and the yes or no refers to whether they were treated with EPO or not.
Who's saying that, David?
It's in the files.
No.
Does it say it?
You are presuming it says. That's what it says.
The actual study that this was based on. Professor Concone he wrote a paper for the International Journal of Sports Medicine. He gave a talk to the International Olympic Committee delegates at Lillehammer in the 1993 Winter Games. And basically he said, I have done a study on 23 athletes. I've treated them all with EPO. They were all amateur athletes, and I have found out lots of interesting things from this study. And then, 6 years later, Professor Concone's files were seized as part of an investigation. And one of the things that the investigators looked for was this study with the 23 amateurs. When they looked, there were no 23 amateurs, but the findings that he produced in his study matched exactly.
No.
Matched
similar.
Exactly.
Similar.
To the 23 professional athletes, one of whom was Stephen.
We have Stephen here now. Stephen, did you ever meet this Concone fella?
Once again, the papers have said that I met him and that he was the team doctor in Carrera. He was never the team doctor in Carrera, never, ever.
Well, what about Dr. Grazzi, your
Dr. Grazzi was
team
the team
doctor?
doctor in Carrera.
Yeah.
But also, I'd like to point out also, is that in 1992, when I went back to Carrera, I was also involved with my doctor in Germany, Dr. Müller-Wulfar. He was the one that sorted out my knee problem, my back problem in 1998, and I stayed with him right through because I wasn't with Carrera, I was doing different teams. So basically I was using, I was doing the normal random blood tests that we normally would do with any team, which would normally be about one every month, one every 6 weeks. Because the thing is that if you do a blood test today, for example, you get the results back tomorrow. Doing another blood test the same day, or even the same week, isn't going to change a lot. So the idea of doing a blood test is I would do one maybe 2 weeks before the Tour de France, 10 days before it maybe. I would get a result back saying your low vitamins or your vitamins are okay or low in iron or whatever. So it gives me time to take supplements to build up for the start of the tour.
Okay, how do you explain then this document which was seized by the police and has been made available to journalists?
I cannot explain anything at all. I think it's for concone to explain. And as far as I'm concerned, this document is a load of, I don't know what, but it's, especially when going what David's just said. For example, why will he says that S means yes. When it goes to 3.25, for example, there's also 1.81 there. Why is not giving me the benefit of the doubt and say maybe it was a mistake, that maybe it was 1.81 and not 3.25? There's an awful lot in there that David, for me, he's a lot to explain to me.
Yeah,
okay.
Pat, just
yes, David.
if you just could see the context. I mean, Stephen is involved there are 7 investigations into doping in sport going on in Italy. The Concone investigation is the biggest because Professor Concone was practicing systematic blood doping from 1981. This is a doctor,
Can we just explain though, David, as you do in your article, that in fact blood doping was not illegal
until 1986.
Yeah,
that's right.
And I mean, the Finns, I think, were the first to do it.
That's right.
The idea being that you use your own natural blood, which you transfuse into yourself,
that's right,
and it enhances your performance.
Yeah,
and then it was made illegal.
That's right. And I mean, the Finns did it. I mean, Lasse Viren won in 1972, 5,000, 10,000 at the Olympic Games. He won in 1976 in Montreal, 4 gold medals. Everybody in the sports world sensed that he was blood doping. Evidence came out in 1980. A Finnish guy, our own Eamon Kirkland, should have a bronze medal. The guy who finished 3rd, Karla Meninka, went home to Finland, and the first thing he did was he said, I have been blood doping, I want to give this medal back. And the international... They said, well, it doesn't actually break the rules. And he said, it's unfair, this medal shames me. But did the International Olympic Committee then say, we're going to ban blood doping because we realize it's happening? They didn't. They are part of the conspiracy. Huge amount of sports organisers...
Let's just explain that EPO actually mimics the effect of blood doping.
Same thing, yes. Except
it gives you the same sort of enhancement.
It's cleaner, it's easier, you basically can take an injection.
I want to get a medical view, and this is Dr. Bill Tormey, who's a consultant chemical pathologist at Beaumont, who's already gone on the record, it has to be said, in defence of Stephen. Bill.
Yes, Pat.
What is your view of...
Well, my view that this is an outrageous attack on an Irish icon. To me, Stephen Roche is like Eamon Coughlin, Ollie Campbell, Jack O'Shea, all the great men, Frank O'Neill in the 60s, the great men of Irish sport. And Stephen Roche is right up there. I never met the man until an hour.
Are you blinded by his greatness?
I am not at all, Pat. I'm a cynic, as you know, and the only reason I'm out here tonight is because of what they're doing to this man. I wouldn't come out here in a fit otherwise, even though you're a good bloke yourself.
Thanks very much.
I think this guy... To be honest, I'd have been at Shells and Rovers tonight otherwise, but I'm a football fan and a rugby fan and a sports fan, but I'll tell you this, Stephen Roche is a great bloke. To hammer a guy like Stephen Roche, who in 1987 won the Tour de France, the Giro d'Italia and the World Championship, and I am grateful to Jimmy McGee for actually showing it to us on TV at the time. And I must say one thing about Stephen. To do that when EPO wasn't on the market, everybody here should realise that you couldn't inject EPO into yourself in 1987 because it wasn't available in 1987. That's the first thing. That's very relevant. So Stephen won this stuff clean because at the time, if he was taking amphetamines, you remember what happened to Tommy Simpson taking amphetamines? Stephen would have been caught taking amphetamines, the only other thing that's worth a damn in terms of endurance testing for something like cycling. To the best of my knowledge anyway at the moment. Now I want to say this, I'm going to assume that the hangman, judge and jury that's sitting up there beside you from the Sunset Times, Murdoch's organ, is correct. And I will go to the Court of Appeal, and Tormey's now the Court of Appeal judge, and I'm going to go through this. Stephen, you're guilty as charged, just for the sake of argument here. let's say you had 5.5 twice, and this guy Concone says that the upper limit of normal, the reference range, is 3.1, so Roche is guilty. But if I was to turn around and tell you that you could go back home tonight to your own house, go into the internet, and look up Medical Science, Sports and Exercise Journal, 1999, May, and I have it here, did it the other night, and it says, the increased values of transferrin receptor, which is the sort of thing that Stephen has been hung out to dry on, you have to get 10 micrograms per mil, which would indicate the probable use of human EPO. Stephen, even if you were guilty, according to this guy, you were so far out that you weren't worth talking about. Now, as for your other crimes, you're supposed to have, according to yourself, Stephen, in the press, you had 46 or 47% of your blood tube was consisted of your red cells, which is about normal, believe it or not. And the Sunset Times said that you were 50.2% and 49.6. I have the figures here. I read this thing from RTE. 49.6%. So, Steve, your organisation bans you if you're 50% or greater if you're a male, or alternative if you're 47% or greater if you're a female. No sex discrimination in this one, lads. So anyway, let's say, Steve, that you go out to the street, and you go out tonight, leaving the pubs out, go out tomorrow morning when they're not drunk, go out tomorrow morning and take 150 people or 100 people off the street. And somewhere between 0.8 and 3% of those will have levels of 50% or greater and would be regarded as dopers. I don't mean marijuana smokers, dopers, if they were in the cycling business. So in other words, and one other interesting thing, if you go into the internet again and you look at the pack cell volume in elite athletes, and you go to the Lancet, and you don't go very far back, you go to 1998, and I would say that Mr. Walsh, the same school as me, I believe it or not, if you went into the internet, you'd find that in an Australian study, 2.8% of elite athletes, cyclists in Australia, had PCV levels greater than 50% in a study that went on 10 years. So I would say that no judge in any court of appeal would convict you, Stephen, of anything. They would say, not proven, and throw it out. And I would hate to go down to the four gold mines to defend the case of hanging you out to dry like the Sunday Times did.
What about that?
In other words, Stephen, you're an innocent man.
David, what about that? I mean, what is being said here is that the rush to judgment, or even the rush to reporting, perhaps was too hasty.
No, I don't accept that at all. The thing that we don't talk about when we sit down to talk about, when we make defences, and establishing legal proof that somebody doped is extremely difficult. There's no doubt about that, because guys who dope don't do it in the public eye. They don't come out. It's not like committing a crime where somebody can come along with the camera. This won't be caught on camera. But what we don't talk about when we talk about doping in cycling are guys like Johan Dreyer, Paul Hagedorn, young guys who died in very mysterious circumstances. Most people, certainly in the case of Dreyer, believe EPO was the reason why he died at the age of 27. Now, there's a huge amount of people being screwed by doping in sport. We know that doping is absolutely pervasive in cycling. I remember the guy that we'll all remember, Pedro Delgado, second to Stephen in 1987, went and won the Tour in 1988. He was found to have a drug called probenecide in his system. Probenecide is a masking agent for anabolic steroids. They were going to kick him out of the Tour de France. They realized that probenecide would only go on the banned list a week later, so he stayed in. But I went to a guy called Stephen Rooks, who was in second place, at the time when it looked like Delgado was going to be disqualified. And I said to Rooks, I said, you know, you must be really excited. You're going to get the yellow jersey. And he said to me, he was Dutch, he spoke English, he said, I don't want the yellow jersey in those circumstances. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, Delgado's been the best rider in the race. I said, he's cheated. He's used a drug to mask anabolic steroids. I don't want it, he said. I don't want it. And I thought, I turned away and I said, you don't want it because you two are in the same position, you're using the same kind of stuff, and you would feel morally that it was unfair for you to get it.
The logical conclusion of your argument, though, is that it's impossible for anyone to excel in this sport without being on some sort of drugs.
I do believe that.
And I mean, then you have to look at other sports where people were caught with drugs. and look at the people who are allegedly clean because they've never been found to have offended and say, I don't believe them either, because these performances are not possible without artificial help. In which case, your profession as sports reporter is finished. There is no point in reporting anymore because everything is dirty.
No, I don't believe everything is dirty. I don't believe Gaelic games, for example, are dirty. I don't, just hold on.
Where's your, David, we're getting away a little from the point here as well. We're talking about a lot of things, but I've taken the time to come across here today because my family, myself, are very, very hurt with an article that you wrote. My credibility is on the line, my family, everyone close to me has been hurt by your article. And you're telling me you went ahead and wrote this article because, anyway, they're all doped.
No, that's not why I wrote it.
It seems you haven't given me any proof, David.
Stephen, I didn't
I
didn't put Stephen's name on the concone files. I didn't put it.
David, you cannot explain why they're there. You have given this thing flimsy here up in your paper. No, you've given a lot of this and buts and everything else. You said the person close to concone said that they've seen my hematocrit level of a 49 point something and a 50 point something. Somebody told you this. But I mean, say, what's David Walsh saying? What is David Walsh coming along and how is David Walsh coming to a conclusion that a friend like myself, that have been so close to each other over the last decade, you can come along now, what has gotten into your bonnet that you've come along now and written such damaging stuff?
I can only do, I know it sounds pompous, maybe pious to say it, I can only do this job honestly. And if an Irish guy appears in files that are really suspicious, I can't say that this guy is Irish, I can't write about him. I spent my summer this year, if I went back to last May, I wrote 2 articles about Linford Christie. 38 years of age, had a level of nandrolone in his system, a banned anabolic steroid, 100 times over the limit at the age of 38. I then went to the Tour de France. Again, drugs were the story there. Yeah. You couldn't get away from it. I then went to Seville for the World Athletics Championships. You couldn't believe the vast majority of what you saw. There was an English woman at the World Championships, Paula Ratcliffe, and she wore a ribbon, right, on her vest. And the ribbon said, please bring blood tests into athletics, we need them. She was the only athlete in the entire arena who wore that ribbon. Why aren't all the others calling for it?
Okay, line 1, there's somebody on the line. Yeah?
Good evening, Pat.
Good evening.
Bernard here. I have a problem. I believe Stephen, as I do Michelle de Bruyne. But my problem has always been that if both of them are 100% certain that the media are telling untruths, then why don't they sue the media? And that's basically all I have to say.
All right, Bernard.
Well, first of all, you must not forget the issue here. I'm convicted of nothing. I've not had any urine or blood samples found to have positive product and performance-enhancing stuff in them. I've been proven, as far as I know, unless David's going to pull something out of his sleeve, with nothing. So why be put in the same boat as people that, well, I'm not saying nothing against Michelle. Michelle is very good, she's done what she's done, but at the same time, I don't think that it's relevant, really, that question, because I think that I am here accused of nothing.
But the question of going to court
to
clear your good name.
Let it happen. I've been with people the last 24 hours since I've been here, and I've been with people who've advised me very well. They've guided me in certain areas.
It's also a long, hard road.
I know it is very hard, but I've got to come to terms with something. Like, for example, coming here, I was saying to myself, well, coming into Dublin, I was saying to myself, well, sure, I'm above all of this. My own heart and soul, I know that I've never done anything wrong, and nobody will ever pull anything out of word to show the contrary. So I'm okay with this. I can live with that. Yeah. Then you arrive in Dublin Airport, and you're walking through the airport and saying, Jeannie, that person's looking at me, you know. Wonder what she's thinking. Wonder what he's thinking. Then he comes home to me and says, Jenny, I haven't realised what's been going on here because I've been away, even though I've been getting the papers. So I'm saying now, I've got to look at it in a different context as to I realise now the damage that's been done. Okay. I realise from the articles how different things have been taken way out of context.
All right, David, I mean, Stephen has said he has not taken EPO. He says even unwittingly it couldn't have been given to him. Are you saying that you don't believe him?
What I'm saying is that if I just could give you a slightly longer answer than a straight yes or no. Stephen Roche and Sean Kelly in the early 80s went into cycling. They were 2 born champions. They were 2 guys who, if there had been no drugs, would have gone to the top of their profession.
Did you hear that? Did you hear that?
Yeah.
David said it himself, though.
Yeah, I do. I say that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the other thing
about is we'd have more champions if the cyclists are allowed, the schoolboys. But now we have at a stage where we have people driving along the side of the road, where we have kids, and they're being told, are they taking drugs because they're winning? Schoolboys, because of David Walsh and Paul.
Does it mean when you win a race on drugs? You win a race on drugs? I'd like to say something, please.
Yeah.
If I may, for a few minutes, maybe a little bit longer. I would just like to say I am deeply disgusted with the newspaper headlines insinuating about allegations on Stephen, smearing his name, his character and his achievements. When Stephen was 13 to 14, as a schoolboy, people could see that knew him that he had great potential. You need 4 things: time trialling, I hope I'm not delaying anybody, time trialling, climbing abilities, and also aggression and determination. And Stephen had all 4. He proved in the Tour of Italy, when the Italians spat at him, jeered him and everything, that he proved he was the best, that he did it with determination, time trialling and the rest. He did the Tour de France the same. He won his Tour de France on his time trialling and his climbing.
Okay.
The same, sorry, just a minute please. The same with Bernardino, Greg LeMond and Laurent Fignon. They won all that on their time trialling ability and their climbing because they were true champions. Stephen once said, if Bernardino has these 2 legs and 2 arms, he can do it, I can do it.
Okay. David, David, I want to say this to you. Suppose this Concone thing all collapses.
Yes.
What happens then? I mean, the damage will have been done to Stephen.
Well, I don't believe for a second it's going to collapse. I've spoken to the investigator and I've spoken to Concone's lawyers, and both of them admit that this is going to go to trial. Concone's facing serious charges. If I could just go back to the question you had asked me.
Do you believe Stephen?
Yeah. Sean and Stephen were 2 tremendous cyclists. There's no doubt about that. They went into a sport where the drug culture was absolutely deep-rooted, and there was no way that you know, they could avoid coming into contact with it. I believe that in the sport that they found, they had a choice to make. And I think most people would have deduced that if you were going to be successful, you had to go the drug route. Just one little small fact. Shea Elliott, another great Irish cyclist, rode in the 1960s, mid-60s. Shea Elliott wrote articles in the Sunday Mirror in 1969, 1970, where he said, cycling is full of drugs. He said, in my career, everywhere I went, I saw drugs, you took drugs, you couldn't get by without them. Shea Elliott's team manager was a guy called Raphael Geminiani. Stephen Roche,
this is guilt by association,
no,
David.
No, Pat, it's not. It's not.
What you're saying is that because a number of people who are prominent observed drug taking, some were found guilty of drug taking, that everybody is guilty. I mean, that principle doesn't work in any court, whether it's a sports court or a court of law.
It's not guilt by association.
What I should have done was done like Paul Kimmage and said, okay, well, I don't want to take something, going to get out of it. But I mean, say, because I stayed in it, that means I took something to stay in it. That I cannot understand, David. Why do you not give the benefit of the doubt when you have no proof, when I've had a clean career, and there's never nothing to said about it?
But Stephen, you haven't been convincing on the subject.
But I haven't had to convince. I've had 13 years of a carear.
Just let me quote
250 dope controls. Okay, you might say they weren't as they were today. But I mean to say I'd never had a hint or anything whatsoever to do a million miles away from doping or this thing has come up today.
In 1997, right, 3 administrators in France, Jean-Marie Leblanc, Tour de France organizer, Daniel Ball, president of the French Federation, and Roger Leger, high up the French Federation director sportif. 3 of them came together and they said, our controls in cycling haven't worked. We have a pervasive drug problem. They went to the French government, they went to the International Olympic Committee, and they went to various national Olympic committees and said, we need help here. We need the police. And Stephen Roche was the guy who said most loudly that this is not the way to go. Cycling should keep its problem internal.
We're going to have to leave it there. Last word to you, Stephen.
Last word. I just like to, David goes a lot on hearsay. And before concluding, David, I don't know why he said this, but he said something to a colleague of his the other week before putting his article in the paper, and his words were, game, set and match on Sunday for Roche. What kind of a journalist
Who did you say that
would
to?
write that?
That is absolutely untrue.
Well,
do you want to name that person?
No. If he names the person who told him I had a hematocrit level of over 50, well, then we might talk about it. But you go in here and say, I'm hearing that now. And I can only think, well, you've got some kind of motivation behind yourself, because you can have no proof whatsoever of me ever taking anything, or even having a doubt about taking anything apart from these concone files, which I myself can sleep at ease with. I'm very distressed for my family, my parents and my direct family, Lydia and the kids, for what's going on. And I just hope that David someday will fall back on his feet and realise what he's doing.
Two things. I didn't put Stephen in the concone files, that's one. And two, time-honoured custom in situations like this is shoot the messenger. And that's what's happening here.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Look, we're going to leave it there. My thanks to David Walsh for coming in, and Stephen, thank you very much for making the journey to be with us. That's all we've time for in part 2. Lots happening before the end of the show. Stay with us. Back after this.